It's Ashleigh from Sweet Dreams Bake Shop, and I can't believe that my littlest is already turning 2 years old. Now, if you're like me, someone that makes a lot of cakes, sometimes it can be really difficult to figure out what kind of cake you're going to make your kid because there's so many options. And if you're a parent, then you know those first 2 years are pretty much the only years where you get to decide what they're going to have. So I'm actually going to be having a much larger celebration for him in July. If you guys watched my Instagram story, then you know why that is the reason. But I am going to still make him a special cake just for the family. So to make things easy on myself, I'm just going to carve the body out of cake, and then I'm going to use Rice Krispie treats to kind of form all of the different limbs and the head. Now, my son drags around his lion, which he calls his whoa-whoa, which is how he actually says lion. We're still working on formulating those words. And it is a very much loved stuffy. So it's kind of going a little bit limp in certain places, and it doesn't really have a perfect stature. And honestly, when it was brand new, it really didn't have a perfect stature in the first place anyway. It kind of resembles those Beanie Boos, but it's not the actual brand. But you could totally use kind of the principles that I'm going to be showing you to create your own little Beanie Boo cake as well. I like to use the pre-packaged Rice Krispie squares just because I find that, one, I don't want to go through that extra step of having to make them myself, and two, I always find that they're the perfect texture. Every time I make it, I find that I have to add a lot of stuff to it just so that it's perfect, whereas this way, it's just ready to go, and I find it's perfectly sticky, so everything sticks to it really nicely as well. Now you'll notice that the back portion of this is quite flat, but I'm really not too worried about it at all because I am going to texturize the fondant that's going to be placed on top. By the way, I am crumb coating today with Italian meringue buttercream, but you can use a ganache for this or you can use American buttercream. Either one will work just fine. Now, I used to make this mistake a lot where I would really compact all of that Rice Krispie square treats and really play with it in my hand, but now I've switched up my ways. So you'll notice that I didn't play around with it too much, and that's why the legs are still a little bit squared off. Instead, I'm going to use my buttercream to round that out just a little bit. I placed that in the fridge overnight for good measure. I was very tired when I was crumb coating that, so I decided rather than trying to play around with buttercream that may not be fully set, I rather just leave it in the fridge overnight. So now my friend is actually going to be covering this in fondant for me while I work on the eyes. So I'm going to be using that small little sphere mold to create the eyes. Now my friend uses a little bit of a different technique. Sometimes I use this technique as well if I'm doing something that's going to be smooth. But basically she took her hands, covered it in a little bit of water just to make all of that meld together a little bit more nicely. Now I'm taking my isomalt and I'm pouring it into the spheres. And you might be thinking, wow, that seems like a lot more than 2 eyes. Reason being is because whatever I don't use up, I'm just going to pack away. But I want to make sure that I have plenty of times to do it. There are so many different ways to cover your cakes, especially carved cakes with fondant. We decided to go with 2 separate pieces. So Rachel is doing a very clever thing and making sure that she's covering the front half first. We're going to cut off all of that excess and then we're going to cover the back half. Now, really, this doesn't matter too much because we're going to be adding texturization anyway. But if you were doing something that was a little bit more smooth, you would want to do this next part that she is going to show you. Now we're going to slow things down here just a little bit so you can see close up what Rachel is going to do. Now this is what I love about observing other people and how they make their cakes. But as you can see, she's a little bit more vigorous with her rolling pin than I am. So a little bit of air bubbles did form, but she just smoothed it right out directly on the fondant before placing it on the cake. Now here we're paneling just as we did before, and we're going to cut it down the seam. Really important that you make sure that you really adhere things together so that when you cut excess off, things don't fall off. Now, if you guys have watched my videos where I do cut excess fondant off, usually on a regular circular cake, I always use that method, and I've only really seen that method used by my friend Rachel, and she was the one that showed me how to do it in the first place. By the way, I have featured Rachel on my channel before a long time ago, and then we weren't able to see each other for a really long time due to restrictions, and now we can see each other again, and I am so excited to be finally decorating with her once more. Now, she runs her own professional storefront, but Like me, she is self-taught, and we both really learned off of online tutorials, and we're both inspired by the cake boss himself. Now, I really want you to take note at how she melds these two pieces together really nicely to get rid of that seam. We're not being too picky because, like I said, we are going to texturize this, but you still do want it to come together. By the way, I am using satin ice fondant today. I find if you want something a little bit more seamless and you're working on a carved cake, then working with modeling chocolate is the way to go. Some of you do mention from time to time that you didn't quite get to see a step in my video or it went a little bit too fast. So I'm really trying to get these up close shots for you so you can see what it's like in real time. If you haven't already invested in one, an X-Acto knife is a must-have if you are going to be working with fondant and especially carved cakes. By the way, I should mention that if you were going to do full cake for this and not use any Rice Krispie treats, then you would need to add a little bit more support. I just have dowels going down the center. I have no supporting boards in there just because everything is fairly light. I'm also not going to be moving this at all. So if you were transporting this, you would want to make sure that you use a little bit more support than I did. If you saw my Cookie Monster cake tutorial, then this is the exact same thing that I did for that. I'm just using some scissors, some very clean scissors, and I am making sure to cut all of those little pieces of fur because that little lion has a lot of fur. What's great about working with someone else is obviously this is going to come together way faster. So while I'm cutting all of this fur, which actually takes quite a bit of time, even though it's an easy task, it is something that is time consuming. My friend is going through and she's making sure to create all those little patches of white that show up all over the lion. And she's really adding in a lot of little stitching just to make this look more like a stuffed animal and not just like a lion made out of fondant. Now, your Beanie Boo or stuffed animal might have a completely different fur texture. I've seen this done using sequin molds as well if your stuffed animal has sequins. So definitely use whatever type of texturization method you would like in order to recreate the stuffed animal's texture. I still have my stuffed animal as a little girl, and her name was Benisa, and she was a very well-loved rabbit. My daughter also has her little bear that she loves too, and we actually tried to replace it with a newer bear because it was almost falling apart, but she knew we were trying to replace it even at a super young age. So hopefully, I hope that bear lasts. Do you guys still have your stuffed animals from your childhood? If so, let me know down in the comments below what it is and how long you've had it for. All right, so now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding on the little snout portion of the lion. I think that's what you call that portion. And make sure that whenever you're going to be placing a large piece of fondant, that you always have proper supports because this can go sideways very quickly. You'll notice that those sticks were actually pointing up a little bit, so this gives this a little bit more leverage. If you just do it straight on, this gives nothing for that fondant to hold on to. We also steam the fondant from time to time to make sure that we can stick pieces on there. I really like to make sure to steam my fondant to add a little bit more saturation, get rid of all of that excess cornstarch, and like I said, it makes sticking fondant easier. Now, I know you guys have seen plenty of clips with me clipping the fondant, but the reason that I'm showing you this is because I'm showing you that I'm putting it in a particular direction this time. So I'm kind of making sure that the direction of the hairs follows the exact same direction of the Steffi's hairs. Now, if I were just making a regular lion, I'd probably paint this part on, but I want to make sure that it looks like that stitching that the lion actually has. So we're doing it with just little pieces of rolled up black fondant. It's actually a miracle that we were able to look at the stuffed lion as we were making this because my son loves to hold on to that thing wherever he goes. And actually last night I tried to sneak it away from him, but it turns out he was still awake in his bed. So we had to leave it, and I'm just glad that we're able to see it. So much easier to recreate things when you can actually look at it. Now my friend is creating a little party hat just to make this a little bit more fun, and I want to add on that little watermelon cake. So we're tying this all together with a little watermelon theme since watermelon is my son's favorite fruit. Now it's time to pop out that iso malt, and luckily they both turned out great. Now one thing is, this is a little bit too dark of blue for this. I think I would rather have used just a clear iso malt and then do the painting on the back. So next time I do a cake like this, I will show you what I mean. Now the reason that I'm torching this is just to make it nice and shiny. A few bubbles had formed on the top and it was a little bit rough. So doing that just makes everything meld together really, really nicely. So if that happens to you where there's a lot of bubbles or things are bumpy on your iso malt, just torch it a little bit. Now, looks a little scary with it all black and dark and blue like that, so I'm just adding a little bit of white food coloring to create those irises. Always use your thinnest brush for things like this, just so that you have the most control possible. And all I'm doing is I'm starting at that center and I'm just flicking it out. Now, if I'm being honest, I definitely would have preferred to put the fondant on the other side of the iso malt so it looked more like the eyes of the stuffed animal. But like I said, I didn't have clear iso malt. So next time I will definitely show you what I mean. Now we're adding on the lion's mane, and again, we steam this just a little bit so that that fondant adheres really, really easily. And Rachel had pre-cut this a little bit before placing it on, and I'm just going in with some of those scissors. And this just gives it a little bit more of a tapered look. I'm adding on a few more sixlets, and there you have it. There is my son's stuffed lion come to life in cake form. Now, I must admit, we did take a few creative liberties with this, mainly the fur. I didn't want to do that kind of greenish tone that the actual stuffed animal has, so we just left it a plain yellow. And when I showed my son this, I wish I could have caught his initial reaction, because he was so excited, and he said it was whoa right away, so I knew that he knew it was his stuffed animal. And boy, did he love it when we sang for him. Now let's get into the pricing. Now obviously this is very custom and not something that you would find on your average grocery store shelf, so it is going to be quite pricey. And as always, this is in Canadian dollars, and I really just give you my pricing guide based on what I would do. Perhaps you might go even more expensive, or maybe you'd go a little bit cheaper. By the way, I was very excited that I actually got to cut one of my cakes. So often you guys are asking me what the inside looks like, or you're asking me to cut my cakes on camera, but I'm often giving them away to people, so I can't cut them. This time around, however, this was all for my son. Of course, we only gave him a little slice, this little slice, but I was so excited that I finally got to cut into a cake. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you can be part of the Sweetie fam. Right now, I'm uploading weekly, so make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when I upload. Also, be sure to comment, request, or ask a question. I love hearing from you guys. Bye!